just get you all to introduce yourselves and what your role is in council for everyone at the committee.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide this proposed submission, which I've got my team members on my right to present to you, give you a quick overview. So basically, on my right, I've got Ali McNay and Rebecca Ferguson, both within the Natural Environment Strategy Unit of the Auckland Plan Strategy and Research Department. I'll hand it over fast as I can to Ali to basically take us into the context for this proposed submission and background, and then Rebecca will helpfully provide a little bit more detail on sort of the process that we've gone through.
Kia ora tātou. So as noted in the covering memo for this, Taumata Arawai, the Water Services Regulator Bill, is a largely administrative bill that will establish a central regulatory body for drinking water safety, along with some responsibilities around stormwater and wastewater performance. The establishment of this regulator is part of a wider central government package of reforms in the water space, particularly in the three water space, which is being led out of Department of Internal Affairs, and that builds on the work that came or was initiated in response to the Havelock North drinking water inquiry in 2017. So that reflects the focus on drinking water safety for human health. The current bill that we're looking at today is expected to be complemented by the release of a water services bill in the coming months, and that will provide more detail around this space, and there'll be wider detail on the system-wide reforms to water services. So that bill will have greater implications for council families, activities and operations, and also for our communities and other partners. So when that bill is released, we'll come back to our committee with further detail around those implications. So for today, we're just restricting discussion to the establishment of the regulator itself. Note that this work stream is related to other work that's going on by central government in the freshwater space, so particularly the Essential Freshwater Program. Our submission here, the comments that we've made, align with the comments that we've made previously on the Action for Healthy Waterways discussion document. And in terms of process and developing this submission, we saw comment from across the council group, also from the CCOs, so Auckland Transport and Watercare, and local boards, and Mana Whenua and the IMSB were also notified. Watercare has since informed staff that they're going to be, or they have submitted a separate submission on this, but their submission doesn't deviate substantially from what council is saying in ours. So that will hand to Rebecca.
Kia ora tātou. I'll just quickly go over what this bill covers and then go over what we've prepared in our proposed submission. So as Ellie mentioned, the purpose of the bill is to establish a new standalone regulator, which will be a Crown agent called Taumata Arawai. This bill covers Taumata Arawai's objectives, functions and operating principles. The main focus of the regulator will be ensuring drinking water safety and public health outcomes throughout New Zealand through regulation and industry support. The regulator will have limited oversight functions relating to wastewater and stormwater networks, but regional councils will remain the primary regulators for the environment as per the Resource Management Act. The bill also establishes the governance structure of the proposed regulator, which includes a board and a separate Māori advisory group, along with a transition board to support the establishment through till when it is established. So in terms of Auckland Council's key submission points, staff are generally supportive of an independent regulatory body to oversee the provision of safe drinking water for communities throughout New Zealand. But we've highlighted a few aspects of the bill that we feel could be strengthened or changed slightly, or where we seek clarification. Firstly, we think the regulator would need more guidance and advice from the water industry, and that this should be stipulated in the bill. Similarly, there's a need for the regulator to consider more fully local community perspectives, particularly considering local Māori knowledge and priorities when considering mātauranga and tikanga, distinct from any national approach to Te Mana o Te Wai. There's also a need for the bill, we believe, for the regulator, we believe, to consider water carriers within the framework, as tankers supply many many households in the rural area. We've also noted that where the regulator has responsibility in the wastewater and stormwater fields, there's potential for overlap with regional council functions, so we'd just like a bit more clarity on that. And finally, the bill is a bit quiet on costs and funding mechanisms for the regulator, and we'd like to understand what the implications would be for councils and the public. So in summary, our proposed submission builds on what we've said to central government in the past on various water programs, but we're broadly in support of the proposed regulator with a few clarifications and suggestions. As Ellie mentioned, this bill is largely just one administrative step in the government's wider Three Waters review, and we'll come back with more analysis and advice on the implications for council that will be a part of the upcoming Water Services Bill, which is expected mid this year. Thank you.
Just one other observation is that the submission will go through to the Health Select Committee in central government, and that we've got an extension for this last week or so just to make sure that Auckland councils have the opportunity to put the submission through this committee. So just wanted to note that there was just that little bit of urgency just to get this through today, so hopefully we'll be in a position to submit in the next couple of days.
Cool. Thank you, Dave, Ellie and Rebecca. Councillor Newman, you have a question?
Question and comment at the appropriate time. Thank you very much for the piece of work that you've done here. I think it's very good. At no stage during the preparation of the bill and the discussion with councils have DIA even addressed at all how the regulatory functions would be funded?
So it's been vague. So I don't think there's been a proper breakdown. There's been obviously with the DIA work some assessment of likely costs as a result of meeting particular standards last year, but maybe not in the context of sort of what the costs will be through to the regulator or the establishment of the regulator. Well, there are some estimates in the regulatory impact statement for this bill, which might be sort of in the order of 10 million to establish the regulator, and then some operational expenditure in subsequent years, but I'm not aware of costs in terms of where they lie sort of in the regions as to how that might flow through.
My follow-up question, but I do want to make a comment about this. I'm a little bit concerned about this, and we've addressed this at paras 27, 28 in your draft submission, but having read the bill, but not having been party to the discussion at an officer level with officials from DIA, normally a regulator would be, probably part funded by the organisations that it's regulating. That's not addressed in the discussion at all from the Department of Internal Affairs. There is no indication for the department as to whether there will be an appropriation through a departmental vote for this entity. There's nothing at all to clarify who's paying the 10 million upfront plus the subsequent ongoing costs.
So that's my understanding is that there has not been that level of detail, and that's partly why in the submission draft there is a question there that we're sort of putting back to central government to seek some clarification on that.
Councillor Cooper, question?
No, it's just happy to move, Mr. Chair, so it can be discussed.
A seconder?
Second.
Deputy Mayor. Question, Councillor Casey.
Question, comment. I think we need to keep spelling out to the, if that's okay. Yeah. I think we need to keep spelling out to the government we're different from the rest of New Zealand, and that we do have 21 local boards, and I know that this went out to the local boards for comment and you've incorporated it, but I think we need to spell it out. It's the only thing that's wrong with the report. It just this regulator, this piece of legislation is not for us. We've got A+, we always have had. It's for the rest of New Zealand, and yet we'll have to work with it. And you mentioned a couple of times the need to incorporate at some stage the needs of local communities, and we get our feedback through the local boards. So if you can put in just an extra paragraph at the beginning that's how we operate, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Wilson.
Thank you. It was very, very clear for a topic that's actually not very clear at all. Look, I'm just wanting to query, please, para 23 and then 31 as it goes through the Māori impact statement. And I'm trying to get a sense of the nature of the language. So it's mooted as supporting the requirement for taumata arawai to uphold te mano o te wai, and I'm assuming that's locally. And also, again, it says that in para 31. So I guess I'm sort of not necessarily advocating, but wanting to know in terms of the council's submission if that's a very strong recommendation or it is just supports, because it will make clearly a big difference in that sense. So there is already support said in this report, but I'm curious as to the submission itself and whether the language is stronger than that.
Sorry, so just to clarify, so in 23 of the submission, paragraph 23, you suggesting that the language we're using be stronger? Sorry,
I'm just checking first to make sure that I'm on the right track, and that indicates 23 is an indication of the support of localised, as was already described, and then that's emphasised through into 31 of the Māori impact statement. So in the submission itself, I'm really checking to see if the localised views of mana whenua, the appropriate language is sufficiently strong to say more than we support it as the submission.
Sure, right. Yes, so I think in the concluding paragraph in the submission itself, there is the statement that localised expressions of te mana o te wai will be considered by taumata arawai, and particularly the expression of te muri o te wai. So I think we have tried to express that in the submission. Sorry, there's in the covering paper 23 and then 23 in the submission itself are talking about similar things. So you're referring to the submission here or the covering?
I am. So in essence, I'm referring to the Māori Advisory Group that's going to be set up by the powers that be, and as part of the submission, that there's an acknowledgement, as you've said, Councillor Casey's already said, we're a unique bunch here, and we would assume that would be the same for the uniqueness of the mana whenua views here. So I was looking at those two paragraphs and trying to ensure that as part of the submission, as much of the support that could be provided in strong language to indicate the localised view should be taken into consideration.
So, Karen, just to clarify, yes, in paragraph 26 of the draft submission, we make a particular point of saying that the local flavour needs to come through. So we're trying to echo what we've said in the agenda report through to the proposed submission, that we do think that, firstly, in principle, we support the advisory group, but that secondly, and also importantly, we want to make sure that the local flavour is coming through in terms of how te mana o te wai may be expressed. And so in the Auckland context, we know that we've had a lot of discussion about how that is got a different flavour to the te mana o te wai in the national context.
Cool. No more questions. So was Councillor Newman, you'd like to speak?
Yeah, when you read the Clause 11 provision of the bill, it addresses the functions of taumata arawai, and it addresses, it talks about national level oversight, leadership, communication, coordination. It also deals with monitoring and enforcing compliance. I mean, enforce compliance. How does an entity that doesn't have a funding stream to fund its operations enforce compliance? It's quite unclear to me. The issue here is that without the bill addressing the issue of how it's going to be funded and understanding how regulators usually are funded, guess who's going to be paying for this? It'll be Watercare, i.e. the ratepayers of Auckland, who are going to be doing the heavy lifting around this, I suspect. And of course, Watercare actually has regulation, bespoke regulation that already applies to it around minimum price. So I have a real problem with, and you've addressed this succinctly at paras 27 and 28 of the bill. Chair, I don't know who's going to be making submissions on this matter over and above our submissions. There's an opportunity to address it at select committee, but this has to be addressed because I suspect the vagueness is because the cost is not fully quantified, and when it's fully quantified, most regional councils are going to say we can't afford to pay for this, and so most of the costs will end up back on the ratepayers of Auckland, which actually has a water organisation that's providing very good quality water to its communities already because it meets or exceeds. But the real target is the other parts of New Zealand where the water quality is lower. So therein lies the conundrum, and it needs to be addressed. So I commend you for the submit. I commend, through you, Chair. I think the officer's done a very good job, and the submission addresses this. But I do hope when the submission is lodged that you will be available to appear before the Select Committee to address this point, because how this is paid for, who's going to pay for it, and the equitable allocation of costs needs to be addressed at the Select Committee, because it is touched on the submission, but it needs to be fully considered at that time, and it needs to be further debated before this is passed into law. Because, what do you say, $10 million? I think it's probably more than that.
So 10 million was the initial establishment cost. I think the operational cost annually is 50 to 60 million. So, and I think it's likely that as a Crown entity, they'll be seeking obviously a Crown appropriation. The question, though, as you say quite rightly, is that there is the possibility, you know, as to how they come to councils. Hopefully that'll be in a more targeted way. But I've had no indication from DAA that they are looking to pass costs on. It's not to say that that's not a discussion point.
So it will be passed on. Make no mistake about it. This will be passed on to local government, because that's what always happens. You have a regulation set by Parliament, passed on in part or in whole. It will come back to us. And because there is only one part of the country that's actually big enough to absorb a lot of these costs in terms of a water organisation of standard to be able to, and scale to be able to drive a lot of the work around development and compliance, it will be Auckland. And this can't be falling disproportionately to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And I will discuss about Select Committee and presenting to it offline. Member Wilcox in the debate.
Yes, so I'm quite happy to support the submission. I would have liked to have seen the water care submission. I think it sends a bad signal that we're kind of sending things almost in silo. Whether it is a silo or not, I think it provides a really bad signal that we're not working together. This is our own CCO, and so in that respect, I would have liked to have actually seen it in the report, because it just leaves me wondering, well, what have Watercare said? And it also leaves me wondering, what have they said about this issue, exactly what Councillor Newman has spoken about. The other thing I think is that I feel we need to really hammer home that we should have really hammered home the local variations within Auckland and elsewhere, because we all think we're special. I'm pretty sure Havelock North and everywhere else thinks they're special as well. So I think, we just need to hammer home that local variations have to be seen. It's not one bridge covers all. So that's all my comments and all I have to say. I'm supporting it totally. Thank you.
Thank you. Good comments. Thank you, Member Wilcox. I have no other speakers. We have mover and a seconder. All those in favour? Aye. Aye. Anyone against? No. Carried. Thank you. Thank you.